Hey guys, it's Maymay and it's time to start our autumn paper bag mini album. Now we're doing this paper bag mini album using the Hello Fall paper pack and these paper bags. Now you can use your own paper bags, and I'm holding this here so long so you could see the measurements of the bags that I'm using. Today we're going to assemble the inside of the mini album. So in this video you're going to get to that point. So by the time we're done, you'll have it assembled and ready to start working on the other pieces and parts. We're going to use 8 of the bags. I did a little test and I think 8 works out really well. It'll give you a nice, good size album, and you'll have plenty of room to load it up with some great fall and holiday pictures. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm taking my bone folder and I am squishing, yes, I'm squishing down all of the puffiness at the bottom of the paper bag. These bags are beautiful, honestly. They are the nicest paper and they just squish down so well. They get so flat. And that's really cool in the construction of your mini album because you won't have a lot of resistance from them, and I really, really like them. So you're going to take all 8 bags and just use your bone folder and crease them down nice and snug. Now that you've got all your bags nice and flat and creased, we're going to take this little flap and turn it into a pocket for later. I'm using some wet glue, and I'm actually using art glitter glue. I'm going to pull this flap back, and on the edges, I'm going to run just enough glue to glue the sides of this loose flap down. This will later become a pocket, the middle section that we're leaving open there. So we'll be able to slide tags or photo pieces or any kind of thing into that little shallow pocket we're creating. Now it's important that you use a wet glue for this and you let it dry nice, and see how that lifted up? You want to let this dry. So what I decided to do is just go through and do all of the bags and sit them aside and let them dry, and then come back and I'll show you the pocket in a second. Now the reason it's important to use wet glue, here's the deal. If you use a sticky tape here, which will be okay, but if you use a sticky tape, that adhesive never dries. So when you're sliding an image or a tag or a piece of paper in and out of that little flat pocket, a lot of times it will catch on the sides. Now for this particular application, it's not that big of a deal because it's a very shallow pocket. So you don't really have to stick that picture or tag in very far. So really it won't be a big deal. But I do always use my wet glue for pockets. So I'm going to go through and seal all of these little flaps down, and then we'll come back and look at the pocket that it creates. So now that I've got all of the pockets sealed down, I'm going to go back to that first one and show you what this pocket looks like now that it's dry. It's a very shallow pocket, and we're just going to use it to hold some little cutesies as we get going, but those are all sealed and ready to go. So now that we've got the pockets made for the bags, now we're going to create a page flap. Now this is going to be inside of each signature of the book. This will make sense in a minute when we start to assemble. What you're going to need are 4 pieces of cardstock cut 5.5 by 5 1/4. And don't worry about the measurements. I'm going to have them in the description below. I'm also going to have a blog post on our website to have that information. These sheets you're going to score at 1/2 inch in from the 5 1/4 side. And I know that's so confusing. So basically, you're going to score them at 4 3/4. All that information will be written for you. The reason we're doing that is so that we can have a flap to glue inside the section of the bag that is the gusset. So you're just going to have 4 pieces. You're going to score them on the 5 1/4 side at 4 3/4. That's what I'm doing here. You can see I'm putting them at 5 1/4, scoring at 4 3/4. So really that little piece on the other side, the little tiny piece on the other side of the score, is going to be what we adhere it to the inside of a bag with. So make those and we'll put them into the bags. Now we're going to add adhesive to the flap that we just scored and created. I'm going to use sticky tape at this point. This is the 8mm sticky tape. It's a little thicker than 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to put it on both sides of this little flap that we created. Now the flap is the smaller side from where we scored. It'll make sense as you see this go into the bag. I'm using my acrylic block to cut the edge nice and straight at the end of the page. And I want to tell you this is the kind of project that you need to watch all the way through one time before you start to assemble, because then these pieces here that I'm doing make perfect sense. So maybe just sit down, watch through one time, and then if you're going to make this later, you can kind of watch it in pieces and parts. But I'm going to do this to all 4 of the flaps we just created. I'm just going to put this adhesive on both sides of that little scored edge. Since we have the adhesive on both sides of those flaps, it's now time to put them in to the gusset of the paper bag. So I'm going to release one side of the adhesive on this little strip. Now, for some reason, I thought I'm going to add another strip of sticky tape on the other side of this score line to kind of give me extra adhesive. But then as I get going, I realize I really don't need that. So rather than waste the tape, I just end up using what I've got on there, which is the one piece. So you only see me do this one time. So I'm going to release that backer. Now we're going to be working on the side gusset of the paper bag. And this is the top of the album. I'm using it from the top. You could put it anywhere, but this is going to be the top portion of my album. So I'm going to sit this in to where the score line is just above the bag. This allows me to be able to turn that flap down freely without any resistance because the score line is slightly above the bag. Now I need to do the same thing on the other side, and here I'm going to release that backer. And this one I thought, I'm going to run some art glitter glue down instead of doing sticky tape, and that way I'll have extra adhesive and I won't have to worry about it coming loose. But to be honest, as I get going, I decide that's overkill and I don't need it. That sticky tape is amazing. It's going to work just fine. So this is what the page will look like. It'll have this flap for photos or whatever we want to put, and that's the top of the album that you're looking at. So I'm going to do this to 4 of the bags. I'm not doing it to all 8. I'm only doing it to 4. But you could certainly put these flaps in every single one of the bags. I just think it's neat to add some extra real estate this way. So I'm going to go through and do the same thing, add these into the gusset at the top section of the bag, and then we will start to assemble putting our bags together. At this point, I'm going to create a binding for the inside portion of our page signatures, which is basically the 2 insides of the paper bags where the flaps are facing up. And I decided to let you see how I decided the size of this binding piece. I want to cut a piece of cardstock that will cover this entire section. So I take out my ruler and I measured it. Now you don't have to worry if you're using the same bags that I'm using. I'm going to have those dimensions for you in the description below. But if you decide to use a different bag, this is how you come up with the size of your binding piece in the middle. So I measured the width of the 2 flaps and the height of the 2 flaps, and I cut cardstock to fit that area. I'll show you how I do that. This is how I make my notes. I find a scrap and I keep my notes. So just to let you know, that's how I create these mini albums. My measurements came out to 5.5 by 4 3/4 for these binder pieces. Now I'm using the same craft colored paper because I'm going to go back and decorate it with my decorator paper later, which actually just adds more stability. But I wanted it to kind of blend into the background and really just be a working piece of cardstock. So I've cut 4 of these because remember, we're only using these on the inside hinges. This is going to cover up those bottoms of the bag. Now we're going to score them in half at 2 3/4, and this is on the 5.5 inch side. All that'll be in the measurements that I put below in the description as well as on the blog post. So I'm scoring all of these guys down the middle, and then we're going to put those bags together using them. So this is how the bags will lay out. Notice I've got the flap on the right hand side facing inward, and then I'm going to assemble them together just like this, okay, with the bottoms of the bags facing up. But what I want to do with my adhesive is this is where it's going to take some pressure. There's going to be some pulling and tugging on our mini album. So I'm going to use a lot of adhesive. You could use the full sheet adhesive here and cover this entire piece in the full sheet sticky adhesive, but I just find doing this works just great. I'm just going to run 3 strips of this 20mm adhesive all the way down either side of this binding piece. I think this works great. If you're going to use wet glue, just be sure you use plenty of it and you give it plenty of time to dry, but this sticky tape works perfect for this. You could use sticky tape and wet glue together if you wanted to be super careful. It's totally up to you. So I'm going to cover every one of these binding pieces, all 4 of them, in 6 pieces of my sticky tape, and then we will bind the pages together. This is probably my favorite part. I love to peel the backer off of adhesive and glue these pages together. It's very therapeutic for me. So I'm going to release the adhesive on one side of our scored line. I'm going to fold this in half. I'm only going to do one side at a time. That way I don't end up sticking the bags together kind of crooked. So I'm going to lay this binder piece down covering the bottom of the bag. And this is going to kind of clean it up too. We're getting rid of all those fold marks in the bag. It just looks prettier like that. Then I'm going to fold that over and release the adhesive on this side. This is, like I said, the inside binding. So remember, we've created a pocket in this bag, we've added a flap, and now we're putting two bags together. So I'm going to remove this, and here's how I line them up. Make sure your flap is where you want it, and I want my flap at the top of the bag inside on the right hand side. You can change that. If you want the flap on the left hand side, you can do that. So just lay these super close together, almost touching, and then grab it with that binder piece. And this is what one signature is going to look like. This is creating our signature. So we're going to make 4 of those all together with our bags. Let's do another one together. So I've released the adhesive protector from one side. I'm going to stick that down to one bag. See, I have the flap on the right hand side at the top. And now I'm going to glue these two together. This flap actually that we attach to the side of the bag, it can go either way. We can flip it forward or back. I just want to keep them all going in the same way for my own thought process, but you can turn those extra little flat pieces we put in any way you want. Now here's our second signature. Notice I was a little crooked. Do you see that? All I'm going to do is lay this down and do a little push back, and then use my bone folder to kind of straighten that out, and we're perfectly fine. Paper projects are very forgiving. Okay, so I'm going to continue this same thing for the next 2 signatures, so we'll have 4 of these total. Now we need to create the binder pieces that are going to put our signatures together. We've created those 4 signatures, and now this piece, which is 4 3/4 by 2 inches, is going to be what we use to hold those 4 signatures together. Real easy, you just need 4 of these. So I'm going to cut these real quick, and then we will put those together with the sticky tape adhesive. On these, just like we did for the binder pieces for the middle of the book, we're going to score them in half. And these we score in half at 1 inch. So I'm going to score all 4 of these in half at 1 inch. My 20mm sticky tape fits perfect on this, so I'm going to use 1 strip of that on either side of our scored line, and that way we can stick those together. This makes it super easy. Again, you can use your wet glues, you can use your smaller sticky tapes. Just use a good bit on these pieces because these are the ones that are going to hold your book together for, a long time. So you want to make sure you're not skimping on adhesive in the binding. Here we're going to put our signatures together. So I'm going to fold this binder in half and go ahead and score it. Then I'm going to remove the sticky from one side. Again, I like to work one side at a time because I will make a mess if I release that other side. I'll have it sticking to me all over the place. Now when you put your signature down, make sure you have the flap on the inside where you want it in your book. Remember, I want mine on the right side and at the top of the book. This little binder goes to the far left edge, and then this piece is going to hold it to the other signature bag. So I'm just going to release the adhesive. Then I'm going to lay the other signature, checking every time that I have it in the orientation that I want it, and then stick these guys together. You're going to do this with all 4 of those signatures we created, and this is what you will have. I've slowed down the video for the flip through. I want you to see we bound the insides of the bag and we have a flap. And then when you go to the next page where we put our smaller binding, we're going to have all of this space to put some pretty. So every other page will have a flap and every other page will not. So this is just the beginning construction of the mini album. This is part 1. I don't know how many parts we'll have, but I'll be sure to keep up with that as we get going. But if you can get your bag assembled to this point, you'll be ready for video number 2. Check out our blog post for a supply list of all the supplies I plan to use for this, including our measurements, and I'll also put the measurements in the description bar below. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you're going to carry along with us and make a mini album, let me know in the comments below. I want to know if you're going to make one with me because I'm going to want to see them when we finish. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great weekend, and part number 2 will be up on Tuesday. Talk to you again real soon. Bye-bye.